Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lloyd Souza, and I'm with Consumex. I'll be your host for today. It's with great pleasure that I extend a warm welcome to all of you for our highly anticipated webinar on unlocking data potential to drive sales and distribution growth. In today's dynamic business environment, data isn't just a buzzword. It's a very powerful asset that has the potential to revolutionize the way we approach sales and distribution strategies. We have gathered here today to explore how data, when harnessed effectively, can propel your business to new heights. This webinar is not just a passive learning experience, it's an interactive platform where we will deep dive into strategies, insights, and techniques that can reshape the future of your organization. So throughout our session, our thought leaders will share the experiences, challenges, and success stories, providing you with practical takeaways that can be implemented immediately. So before we move on to the discussion, I would like to take you through a very quick housekeeping about the Zoom platform. I'm sure most of you here are aware of Zoom platform. However, to make it easier, I'll just take you, if you just look at the screen below, you'll see the raise hand feature, the chat box. Anytime during the discussion, you have any questions, any comments, any suggestions, you can type in your questions, or you can raise hand. We will bring it up during the discussion, or towards the end of this webinar, we have a dedicated question answer session. We will bring that up during that session. So without any further ado, I would now like to introduce our moderator for today's session, Mr. Venkata Velugubanti. He is the Solutions Director with EdgeVerve. Venkata has over 23 years of experience in retail, CPG, and agri-industry, and he's been managing end-to-end life cycle for cloud-based products to solve some of very large-scale critical business problems through appropriate IT strategy and solutions. He's currently responsible for driving digital transformation through data, analytics, and business intelligence tools for multiple markets. He's also reimagining businesses by designing an innovative digital strategy through cloud-based platform solutions and by capturing the right insights and making them actionable, which translates into improved business operations, satisfied customers, and leads to P&L goals achievement. Thank you, Venkata, for joining us today. And over to you now to take this discussion ahead.
Thank you, Lloyd. Thank you so much for that kind introduction. Good afternoon, all of you. Thank you so much for joining us. I know all of you have very busy schedules. So it's great to have you here this afternoon. Let me quickly introduce Sanjeev, who would be the expert from CPG industry today with us. He's going to share his experiences, his thoughts, his understanding of the current market trends and opportunities. Let me, give you all a quick background about Sanjeev. So Sanjeev spent more than 3 decades in FMCG industry. He has been with multiple brands like Laughing Cow, Pillsbury, Häagen-Dazs, Amul, Fruity, Nature Valley, and Godrej. And all of them are brands which are very dear to the consumers. So his focus has been to deploy growth strategies with the clear intent of improving market share, growing profitability, and ensuring sustainability, all with a view to deliver superior value to the stakeholders involved. These strategies have focused on new customer acquisition, go-to-market models, and profitable revenue management. He has driven new business models and taken brands to new categories, segments, geographies, and verticals. Sanjeev is an avid reader and closely follows the latest market developments and share his thoughts regularly on LinkedIn. So I have been a regular follower of Sanjeev's posts on LinkedIn. I'm sure you all can follow Sanjeev on LinkedIn and see his posts on a regular basis. Thank you so much, Sanjeev. We are privileged to have you here this afternoon. So I would
Thank
like
you.
to, interact, rather engage Sanjeev this afternoon to touch upon some of the key areas where each one of us are interested to understand and learn, right? So we will have quick look at the trends and advancements in FMCG industry with a specific focus to emerging markets and India. We'll also spend some time on how to achieve complete channel visibility across multiple channels, that is general trade or traditional trade, modern store trade channel, and e-commerce channel. And then once you have channel visibility, how do you leverage that data to generate actionable insights coming from that channel data? And how do you leverage these insights to achieve superior retail execution and measure the improvements in terms of business outcomes and KPIs? And all of this leading to strategies to improve revenue growth and sales effectiveness. Thank you, Sanjeev. Just
Thanks
to
a lot, Venkata. Thanks for the very kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be over here with everyone. Thank you.
so let's quickly dive into the
Sure.
topic. Um, So we are just back from the COVID pandemic. There have been many challenges, many things which we have not seen for a long time. So we have seen supply chain disruptions. We have seen commodity shortages, etc., and inflation because of the war. And looks like we are slowly again gaining, getting back to normalcy. So, amid all this, what has happened over 2, 3 years? So, what do you think are some of the trends which are going to influence the consumers, the CPG industry, and have an impact? Or these are the things which CPG or FMCG managers should be looking at to build their plans and strategies.
Sure, Venkata. So I think, like you rightly pointed out, there are a lot of things which are happening. It's an uncertain world, simple as that. And as we continue to live in an uncertain environment, the only thing which is very certain is that there's going to be change, there's going to be uncertainty. The question is, how well prepared can we be for all of them? Okay. Now, maybe not only from a immediate perspective, but also from the last few decades, I'd like to talk about a few of the key changes, key trends, which have been kind of impacting the FMCG industry. I'm sure there'll be a lot of them, and but we'll try to take on a little bit of a few of them, and maybe I'll talk about it a little bit. So maybe Venkata, if you can share
Yeah,
the slide, and I'll talk about
sure,
uh,
sure.
some of these, trends and changes which have been kind of happening over here. Now, the point to remember for the audience also is that what's been put up on the slide is are a few of them, and I'm sure as the audience, as people who are within the industry, you could have possibly personally gone through changes which are not listed over here. The point is that we talk about the broad changes and how it kind of affects the context which we're going to be discussing in this comment in the current session. Now, one thing, given whatever limited experience I have, I've seen a lot of changes happen over the last few decades. Okay. And one of the things which people within the country, people who are from India in the audience, will realize is that there's been a huge seismic shift, if you look at it in the last 3 decades from an infrastructure perspective. Okay. And particularly when you talk about it in the context of FMCG products, which are needed to be reached out, to ideally everyone within the country, the infrastructure is very important. Okay, be it roads, better connectivity, and people who are within the FMCG industry will realize vehicular capabilities. Then this whole aspect of the telecom industry, which has kind of grown by leaps and bounds and enabled a lot of things. Okay, uh, particularly from a digitization perspective. So all of these things and a lot of other factors are also contributing to better accessibility for brands by the end consumers. And this is across geographies, across markets, rural, urban, you name it. And infrastructure is the bedrock. If the infrastructure does not improve for a country, you're going to have challenges in terms of the growth of any other allied industry. So I would rate that as something which I've seen over the decades, which has been constantly improving and will continue to change. So you are going to be definitely hearing a lot about it. The second thing, which coming more to a functional aspect, is this whole aspect of the proliferation of channels. I'll probably kind of talk about it in three buckets. There were three buckets or 3 decades which I have seen through. The first decade, which was prior to the 2000, and I'm talking over here broadly, okay? If you had to purchase something, you had to go to your neighborhood kirana store, or your grocery store for any and everything, okay? And this is what we call the traditional or the general trade. And there was a huge prevalence of the wholesale trade, primarily because of linked to the first factor, which was the infrastructure. We couldn't reach out to any and every outlet, within the country. So you had a thriving wholesale ecosystem also, but it was all largely traditional trade dominated. Now, coming to the next, decade, which was from 2000 till 2000, again, broadly speaking over here, you saw modern trade come in, okay, organized retail chains, which helped improve the size and quality of assortment. We also saw organized wholesalers enter the FMCG space, okay. Now, after that, what's happened is come over to the next decade, which is between 2010 onwards till 2020, you had e-commerce platforms kind of come in, and you could order online. So there's been a progressive shift in terms of channels kind of opening up for consumers, allowing them to, go to various platforms or various channels and purchase whatever they may want to. Now, apart from this, from a CPG or a FMCG industry perspective, and Venkata, given this whole pandemic thing which you talked about it, we saw the out-of-home consumption get completely impacted during the pandemic. None of us were actually moving out. But post that, what's been happening is that the out-of-home consumption is on the rise. And we're seeing a lot of organized efforts. Earlier, I used to see this to be kind of completely disorganized. You would kind of, potentially go to a particular customer and try to sell your products. But now it's becoming very organized. The organizations are very specific in terms of catering to the demands of this particular channel. Okay. And what they're also doing is that they're making the efforts to understand what the guests or what the actual customers over here in such kind of a channel are demanding, and also trying to delight them. So it's a proactive effort which is going on over here with respect to the out-of-home consumption. Okay. The other thing which I just want to touch upon, Venkata, is this whole aspect of D2C. We saw when the pandemic had kind of come in, we saw a lot of brands taking to the D2C route. Okay. Now, there was the D2C channel was there prior to that also, but it kind of just exploded at that point of time where smaller brands not being able to reach out to customers decided to focus on that. Now, today also, when the pandemic is not there, there are a lot of brands, particularly the startup brands, who are taking the D2C route and reaching out to customers. And they do it for multiple reasons. They could be testing out a new strategy. They could be trying targeted products. And this is something which we will talk about it slightly more. What the D2C channel also enables is better insights and the ability to control, the overall experience, which is quite unlike when you, let's say, go to a traditional trade store where the experience may not be the one which you are actually looking for. So from a perspective of the consumer, today the consumer has multiple channels, and brands are trying their best to ensure, that it's an omni-channel experience. So wherever you go, you try to get the same experience. We're still a long way off from on that front, but yes, brands are making the effort, and you'll see a lot of work being done in that direction. A third point which I want to bring up, Venkata, over here, and it's very pertinent from the perspective of what we are discussing, is this whole aspect of digitization. Okay. We talked briefly about the telecom sector opening up, then there's been the spread of internet. You have a lot of smartphones kind of coming in across price ranges. So what's that all enabled us is that, from a consumer perspective, if you look at it, they've kind of taken to the digital world in a very big way. I think most of us will remember 2016 when demonetization happened. The pandemic, obviously, we remember. But what this has helped, enable is the fact that consumers have started adopting the digital formats in a much, much faster way. Okay. And as their comfort grows, you'll see a lot of offerings coming in. And you will kind of see that a lot of things are being enabled as a result of that. Now, that's on the consumer side. But when you look at it from a business perspective, what's happening is that brands are also seeing the benefit of this whole aspect of digitization, wherein they're being able to access data in real time, and which, earlier it used to always come at a lag. I remember when I started off working, we had a paper format where we used to fill up our daily sales reports and send it off to wherever, the head office was. So it would take maybe by the time the report would come in, probably a month was gone. But now what's happening is that the moment the sales team is in the market, they can capture what the retailer is asking for, or even on any other platform, and the data is thrown up to the brand in real time basis. Okay. What's all this enabling is for the consumer is that it's kind of exponentially taking up their ability to become aware of a lot of things. Okay. So with that, also what's happening is that consumers are demanding for a lot of specific things. Okay. So there is this awareness aspect, there is this aspect of convenience, which is kind of growing up dramatically. And this whole demand from the consumer side wanting products, as soon as possible. So, and I'm sure all of us will have seen this whole aspect in the e-commerce field. We had a lot of quick commerce platforms, and today quick commerce occupies a significant portion of the e-commerce platforms, where people are kind of ordering for things and probably getting it within, anywhere between 10 minutes to 30 minutes. Okay. So this is another aspect which has developed. The pandemic also kind of forced us to think about our health. We were always constantly thinking about our health and saying that, okay, we're going to take care of ourselves. But actually, there was a huge gap between the saying and the doing. Now, what I see happening is that people are actually making concerted efforts. One, to find out information, to consume information, and obviously to discern truth over here, figure out what's the truth and what will be beneficial for them. And then they're actually seeking out products which will fulfill these particular requirements of theirs. So this whole industry, which is from a health and wellness perspective, is kind of going to shoot up. And what you're also going to see, and particularly from a food perspective, since I worked over there for a very long time, is that there's going to be a huge demand for products with lesser ingredients or with clean labels. Okay. Today, you have the back of pack where there are n number of ingredients and people are kind of talking about it. I'm sure all of you who are on social media would be realizing this, and a lot of things being talked about it. So there's going to be this inherent demand from consumers coming in, wherein they'll be saying that, okay, give us cleaner products. Simple as that. Products which are probably as good as what we would have got if we had cooked it at home. All of this is leading up to a situation, Venkata, where there is an explosion in terms of the number of brands. Okay. The retail ecosystem, be it across any channel, it's not exploding exponentially. You have that finite space. So there's going to be this, fight for space across any channel, any platform, any store. And there is going to be this challenge, which we'll talk about as to how brands can, kind of equip themselves. Social media, I want to talk about it about too much, but there's this also emerging trend where social commerce, live commerce is kind of coming up in a big way, already prevalent in a lot of countries outside the country, outside India. But within India, a lot of players are now trying to gain access to consumers through that particular medium. Another thing which is happening, and I see this change not so much in our generation, but in the younger generation, particularly the Gen Zs or the millennials and the people who will come in after that, the whole aspect of sustainability. Okay. How are you actually kind of doing something which is good for the environment? Okay. And there is a subtle shift, if I may say so, which is happening across the generations towards products, like I talked about cleaner products, but even sustainable products, which are not going to harm the environment, are not going to harm the earth. And you'll find consumers taking to such kind of brands in a bigger way. So these are broadly a lot of changes which I've observed and which I think will become all the more important in the coming times. Okay. So what brands will have to keep cognizance of at all points of time is to be aware about these, behavioral changes, these insights which are coming in from the consumers, and act upon that so that they can further, the growth for their brands. Venkata.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sanjeev. I think you covered a lot of ground. I just want to give you a couple of anecdotes from my personal experience, because 1998 is when I started my career with this company called Food World, which was the first organized retail chain of the country. So, as you said, that those are the that was the time when yeah, the organized store channel started gaining momentum, though in a very slow manner. And so, with respect to brands growing in number, I remember that our store, a standard the 3,000 square feet store, used to have a SKU list of about 3,000 SKUs. But I'm told today any supermarket has a minimum of 7,000 to 8,000 SKUs on the list. All of them may not be present on the shelf, but that's the number of potential of SKUs being available. So yeah, so in this 20 odd years, we have seen the distribution channels multiply from a predominantly general trade driven markets to modern trade to e-com to quick commerce to multiple other channels. So that's the one thing which poses a challenge to a marketeer or FMCG company, and how do you balance and how do you manage these multiple channels. Yeah, the other very interesting aspect is the rapid change which we are observing in consumers. You rightly said that may not be so much in our generation, but especially in the younger generation, in the Gen Zs. So the aspect of digital savviness, their ability to find information, and the ability to make choices, not only for them but also for the environment, bringing in the whole element of sustainability and the aspect of health and wellness. So I think all of us agree that those brands which pay attention to health, wellness, environment, they have a definitely better positioning among the today's consumers than the ones which are not paying. So I think this is a very, very large canvas. So I'll give you this difficult question of of all this. What do you think are the 3-4 things which are very, very critical for FMCG executives to pay attention, so that their strategies and plans are in line with the changes in the infrastructure, consumer, and the consumer attitudes?
Maybe I'll pick up 2-3 things. We've spoken about them, but I'll try to frame it in the with respect to the question that you asked. I think, and I'll pick up one point which you talked about, Venkata, but prior to that, I'll just talk about this whole fact within the Indian retail ecosystem. If you look at it, it's disaggregated. Okay. Why do I say it's disaggregated? 80 to 85% is still general trade in India. And it depends on the product category. Some of them might have a low SKU, but they'll be broadly, this is where the industry typically stands now, 80 to 85%. And this whole proliferation of brands, which we talked about it, and going by your experience also, when you look at it from a decade or a couple of decades perspective, a large format store, like you said, could house which was housing earlier 3,000 SKUs, today houses maybe 6 to 7,000 SKUs. Now, from a large format store, that's possible. But if you were to look at it in the context of this fact that the larger market is still general trade, there is finite space over there. So I think the second biggest problem over here, which brands will face, is that whatever they might be wanting to come out with or do come out with, how do they kind of ensure that it's available on the shelves for the consumers to pick up? Okay. And I'm talking more over here on the offline perspective rather than on the online perspective. So one is this whole factor of distribution, the fact that it's disaggregated. The second is this whole explosion of SKUs, which have kind of come in thanks to the multiple brands which are there. The third fact is that, if you look at a country like India, there is income disparity amongst all sections of population, And it makes it very difficult for brands to have a common product offering for everyone. Plus, there is this whole cultural diversity across regions. So, and we talked about it, the consumer behaviors, the preferences, they're all kind of quite segregated, differentiated. How do you kind of accommodate this? So, from a brand perspective, it becomes very difficult, in terms of reaching out to these sets of people. And if you would exclude, let's say, the D2C platforms, which are more targeted, like I talked about earlier, all of the other channels, there is this huge problem of trying to ensure that the product is available when the consumer wants to shop for that. Okay. So I think these are broad challenges which are there, Venkata, for any brand to kind of keep in mind.
Yeah. So just to summarize, what you said is, so there are multiple channels, and then the markets, especially from a general trade perspective, they are not uniform. They have a lot of variation because of the demographics, because of the income levels, and then there are specific consumer preferences. So in this scenario, it is important for the marketeer, the FMCG executive to ensure that the right products are available in the right place, in the right format, right? So to achieve that, so what do you think the approach a brand should take?
So I think maybe let's talk a little bit from an immediacy perspective. Let's talk about it from last 3-4 years perspective. We bring in the context of pandemic also over here. First, I'd like to talk about this fact that yes, there is a change, and there is a change for the better. Okay, how do I kind of explain this? I'll look at it from two perspectives. One is the consumer side, the other is from a brand side also. Now, from a consumer side, we've talked a lot about it already, with respect to the changing trends. Preferences are going to get further defined. Okay, whichever brand satisfies the consumer's needs better will succeed. Simple as that. Okay, so you have to get a better understanding of the consumer over here. Now, what's also happening, Venkata, is that, like let's say the two of us, we are individuals in our own rights. We will have our own needs, we have our own wants. But today, a market is not able to kind of get a brand for Venkata and for Sanjeev separately. Okay. Therefore, there's going to be this demand, towards more personalization, if I were to say it. If I have a problem, I'd like that to be solved, and my problem could be different from Venkata's problem. So these are things which are happening on the consumer side, okay? And it's going to put a lot of pressure on the brand, if I were to talk about it. From a brand perspective, being able to gauge these consumer preferences and any of the changes will be very critical. And I believe technology over here can play a very, very big role, okay? Data and analytics will be extremely critical, okay? If a brand has to be agile, and here it's more in the context of what we talked earlier, they'll need to first collect the data from different sources. Now, these sources could be varied, and they'll need to form a coherent view, one view where they can, act on it, and then to take it up, to kind of find a response to such kind of an insight. Now, given this whole channel dynamics, the consumers buying across channels, it's very important for for brands, to be able to bring all the insights, if possible, in real time, all of it together. So this whole aspect of having the right infrastructure to acquire the data, harmonize the data, derive insights, and take actions which give you measurable results. I would put it like this, So it's more like, kind of having an infrastructure to derive the insights for improvement. That's how it should be. So that's what brands will have to work on, to kind of understanding this changing consumer and be better equipped for themselves.
Thank you. I think you put it succinctly in terms of how do you plan your whole approach in terms of how do you acquire data, how do you combine or harmonize the data, how do you derive insights, and then how do you plan improvements, and then how do you measure these improvements is the cycle which at a high level you talked about. Let's flash an interesting poll question to our participants. We know that most of these are all of them are practicing managers with consumer product companies. So we have a poll question coming up for them. So Lloyd, can you flash the poll, please? So here we are asking, how many of you operate, one channel, two channel, three channel, or all of them? Wow, 77% multi-channel. Kind of interesting, right? See, so we have about 70%, assuming that these people represent different organizations, so about 70% of the CPG companies are operating all three channels. And so it would be interesting, to talk about some of the challenges with respect to each of the channels. Lloyd, can we end this poll? Now, diving a little bit deeper into the cycle of data acquisition, then data harmonization, insight generation, and planning improvements. So now that we have seen most of us operate more than one channel, what are some of the challenges you have seen with respect to acquiring data from the channels? So I also recollect you mentioning that right now we have capabilities of getting almost near real-time data, right? You talked about previously waiting for a month to get a report in terms of what is happening in the market, or to something related to market share, etc., etc. From there to now, wherein you can almost get what happened yesterday today, right? But that's not so much easy as we speak, but there are certain challenges, I believe. So what are some of those challenges you have experienced in acquiring data from each of these channels?
Yeah, Venkata. So it's not as hunky-dory as we talk about it, okay? We can talk about data, we can talk about real time. But the fact of the matter is we live in a very, very, practical world, and there are problems, okay? So maybe I'll quickly take upon, the various channels which are there and briefly talk about what's been my experience with the challenges with respect to each of these channels which we talked about. And I'll kind of keep it limited to the three channels that we polled for, which is general trade, modern trade, and e-commerce, rather than getting into the other channels also. Now, from a general trade perspective, we have already talked about this fact that 80-85% of them are within this particular channel. Where it becomes very interesting, Venkata, is the fact that today this channel is spread across, the hinterland also. So you have it in the urban center, you have it in the rural areas also. And from a brand perspective, what I've seen is that at times, and we'll talk about it a little bit more deeper, it's easier to kind of get the details in real-time basis for the urban markets, okay? Primarily because you have either your own sales system or your distributor sales system who are kind of going there, recording the data on the SFA and then getting it back. And the distributor also more or less in these markets is today digitized. He'll have some form of a DMS which he's punching in, and then that data resides at his end also. Okay, so we'll come to this part in a little while. What happens after that? When you look at the modern trade and the e-commerce world, okay, while it's become organized, okay, I see very few players, okay, who are proactively working with brands to ensure, that the data with respect to the offtakes flows into them very seamlessly. Okay. And for smaller brands or mid-sized brands, this is invariably a challenge. So you typically sell into these channels, and these channels will typically not take more than what is their inventory capability or the space within their stores. And once that kind of moves out, they'll tend to replenish it on a weekly basis. Broadly, that's the framework which is typically followed, by most of them. Where I've seen is there are a few of them have now become pretty proactive. They're partnering with brands to kind of share data with respect to offtake on a daily basis. So there are dashboards from which you can access this data, get it in over here. But a larger ecosystem for the larger set of brands which are today there in the market, this is a very difficult task. And what happens over here for such brands, and I've also engaged in it because there were times, when we were small also, is the fact that you have to set up your own systems to kind of understand what are the offtakes. And you set up alternate mechanisms wherein you kind of look at your distributor sales data as to how much has he sold to these formats and figure out that, yes, this is definitely what the end consumer is also buying. At times, particularly during all these festival seasons where there's an upstocking, there is a difficulty in terms of understanding what is the true kind of tertiary sales which is happening from such kind of stores. So the important part is that how do you kind of ensure that all of these stores, be it in the online or the offline world, they have stocks or they have each of these SKUs which you may want to sell into them at any given point of time. So this avoidance of stockouts, which is typically there, that becomes a big challenge to kind of avoid. So most of us, in the CPG industry are typically working from a supply chain perspective, where they're trying to ensure that whatever is required is available at that particular store. Okay. Now, some brands are being able to do it better. Some brands still require, a lot of efforts in terms of trying to improve upon this whole aspect. But I would say that these challenges which are there are being kind of addressed to in a number of ways by the brands, Venkata.
Yeah. As TradeEdge platform, we work with multiple global MNCs apart from Indian FMCs also. One very interesting case what we have is the PNG. So we started working with PNG for more than 9-10 years now. So the good thing they have done is very early on they realized the importance of the true customer demand to be gathered for them to do their demand planning and also the replenishments, etc., etc. So they have put in a technology platform, they leverage TradeEdge platform to collect data from almost each of their partners. So kind of visibility we have is that we collect data for PNG from more than 60 different countries. And for some of their partners, they collect data at such granularity, like the SKU store level on a daily basis, made available to PNG and the next day, and which is I think phenomenal capability of any FMCG company to have, and they were able to do it because of the time and focus they have given to it. And every day we gather about 10 GBs of data from their partners. We enrich that, we translate it to the language which PNG systems understand, and we supply about 20 GB of data to PNG's data lake, which gets used in multiple downstream applications. So be it replenishment, be it promo analysis, be it demand planning, and many other things. So you're right. So one thing technology side has made available as an option to pretty much every CPG company is these cloud-based systems. So wherein you don't have too much of upfront investment. So it's more like you subscribe as you go, try whether it's working for you or not, because there is no upfront huge investment and you're not sure of what happens at the end of the program. But you can start small, see the results, and then scale. So now, as we talked about, kind of a plan or a program to acquire data and then analyze data and derive insights. Obviously, ROI is a very, very key aspect before you plan and implement any program. So, how do you look at the ROI for any such infrastructure to insights kind of a program? What do you see the aspects on the cost side, and what are the aspects on the revenue or benefit side? And at one point, a program gets qualified, as this is ROI positive.
Sure. So Venkata, see, end of the day, so let's maybe just start from the last point which you were talking about it, okay, or maybe from the front end first. How do your revenues grow? You have to sell something, the consumer has to buy it, simple as that, okay. Now, what is any kind of system enabling or wanting to do is to kind of take up the Salesforce effectiveness, okay. Now, this can be obviously dramatically enabled by the use of various kinds of features which are there on the SFA, right from judicious route planning to outlet coverage or driving sales of relevant SKUs. And here, what I see now, which is happening, Venkata, is that AI and gamification are playing a very, very vital role, okay? Now, for the audience over here, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of salespeople also within this forum, is the front-end sales guy, remember, he wants to succeed. He's not there to fail. Simple as that. That's the mentality with which the salesman typically works. And he wants to achieve his targets. More often than not, he does not know how it will be achieved. That's a big challenge. And whether his achievement is helping the organization reach its revenue and profitability targets. So, it's like an arrow which you fire and it kind of is supposed to do a lot of things. The question is that can we enable these guys, okay, do their jobs in a much better way? And that then flows up into the organization also. Now, over here, the revenue growth is a function of consumer purchases and consumption. We've talked about it. While marketing and the use of various tools is critical from an operational perspective, brands need to, ensure, like I shared earlier, be available 24/7 at the desired points of sale. This is a very difficult task in retail ecosystem like us. However, we'll need to strive towards that goal. Therefore, the more we are able to ensure timely servicing of the consumer demand in the most agile way, the more effective it will be for the brand. Simple as that. Okay. So you cannot afford to miss opportunities. Now, for any organization who's investing into any form of digitization, they will need to set up certain metrics which are measurable as a result of such deployment. And one simple such measure could be to figure out, the decrease in the stockouts across the system. Okay. Because like we talked about earlier also, any stockout is a potential loss of sale. That's how I look at it. Okay. Yeah. So what's the resultant sales which is going to come about as a result of it? What's the cost incurred and the savings generated? Okay. So you have this acronym, which is OTIF, which is on time in full fill rate. It can be a very good KPI, to track across multiple points to ensure high level of product availability. So from a perspective of, the ROI thing, which we talked about, Venkata, it's important that whatever you deploy, and this is a simple thing, across resources which you may deploy, are you getting a return which is justifying that whole cost? Now, when I look at it across, the deployments which I've done in the past, the point is that with that particular enablement, is your sales kind of going up top line? And are you making enough money to cover that cost? Okay. Now, if there is a certain multiple that kind of comes about as a result of that, then it justifies it all the more. So one needs to be sure as to why one is deploying certain things. How is one going to use that? Bring it all together. And then what's going to be the attendant results to justify that cost which is there. So that's how I typically have gone about it, Venkata, in the past. And I think that could be an effective model for any individual who's working or trying to set up this whole system at their end and trying to derive benefits as a result.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. So I have been part of many large programs. But the programs which start with a clear problem definition, benefits summary, cost understanding, and a clear plan, and not changing it midway. Because we also see a lot of projects start with some objective, but then they, veer away from where they started, and then the whole program goes into a kind of disarray, and then everybody starts saying it's a failure. But as you rightly mentioned, so any such program, it's important to have a clear objective and clear problem, what is being solved and what is the benefit anticipated, and a measurement framework on how do you measure these benefits and compare against cost. And I'm sure that most of the programs would be a success going with such kind of a framework. And probably I'll take, so we have, 6 odd questions coming from the audience. So before we take up the questions, I just want to paraphrase um, the aspect you talked about, especially with respect to data, in terms of how do you set up the data infrastructure, data harmonization, insight generation, insights to action, and action to benefits. So, so so we have, EdgeVerve and TradeEdge supply chain platform has been in the CPG space, secondary sales visibility space for quite some time now. So based on this long experience, so we talk about what we call um, um, as the multi-enterprise network. So this multi-enterprise network connects different elements within the CPG value chain. So these are orchestrated by the brand or the company sitting in the center. So you have retailers, you have distributors, you have banks financing these distributors. So you have probably a third party manufacturer supply manufacturing for you. Then there are wholesalers, and then there are logistics partners. So we advocate a complete connected ecosystem, all these stakeholders in the value chain, so that there is a seamless way of sharing data among themselves. And this sharing data leading to almost sensing demand in real time. So you talked about there are companies which gain capability to sense sales almost in real time, and then based on that sales forecast, what is the demand, and then set up the replenishment and fulfill, and so that you achieve that what you talked about is 24/7 availability of the right products across multiple channels. Then forecasting has been one challenging aspect for most of the CPG companies, because you have multiple SKUs. You have sometimes known events, sometimes unknown events impacting your demand. So having right forecasting mechanism as well as the right data feeding the forecasting is very, very critical. So getting clean data, complete data from all your channels is very, very critical for achieving improved forecast accuracy. Then so you have demand, then based on the forecast, how do you do suggested ordering based on your pipeline, right? With more number of customers, with more number of SKUs, a kind of automated suggested ordering mechanism or auto replenishment mechanism is very, very important, right? And then it's also somewhere you mentioned about how do we equip the salesmen on the ground, right? You said that these salesmen, they want to succeed, they want to sell as much as they can, and they want to compete in the marketplace. So now you have tools, Salesforce automation tools, which can provide this very actionable information onto the salesman on the ground. For example, he visits a store and then he gets a history of what are all that this store orders, or he looks at what are the other similar stores like that store are ordering, so that he can guide the storekeeper to order better. Or we can help the salesman to visit the right store by doing the route optimization for him. So instead of just going on a fixed beat every time, so based on the current sales and inventory position, how do you guide him to visit the stores where you have high probability of conversion? So these are some of the real life problems here and now on the ground. Our TradeEdge supply chain platform helps to solve. I think now we move to question and answers. I see some question and answers on the question answer panel. So let us take this first question. So this is from Praveen Tiwari. So this is for you, specifically mentioned for you, Sanjeev. What is he asking is, what do you think will be future of traditional trade or general trade channel, specifically in metro cities in India? So will they be impacted or will they be able to survive? How a packaged food brand can grow GT channel when consumer is moving to e-com or MT channel to make their purchases? I think very, very, pertinent here and now, the problem the FMCG, executives are facing.
No, so Praveen, thanks for this question. I think this is an evergreen question, if I were to put it that way, on a positive side. The fact of the matter is that when modern trade started off also late, like Venkata talked about it, 98 to 2000, I remember at that point of time, there was this huge hue and cry that general trade would collapse and modern trade would, kind of eat up everybody's livelihoods across the country. We have seen for a very long time now, that this hasn't happened. 20 years, 23 years have gone. I haven't seen it happening. Yes, there's been a fair share which the modern trade has occupied. E-commerce today is also there, and there are projections that e-commerce will gallop ahead of modern trade to become a more dominating channel compared to modern trade. But having said that, what's going to happen, Praveen, and you have to remember this, is that general trade today, one, it's kind of spread across. We talked about this whole fact, across the rural as well as urban market. What you're seeing as an impact of modern trade and general trade today is broadly, and I am saying broadly, in the tier 1 cities or the metro cities. It's now going down to the tier 2 and tier 3 cities, but it'll take some time. It's not as if general trade will kind of collapse. What's going to happen from a general trade perspective, and this is something I've seen across the last 3 decades, is that they're going to be definitely reinventing themselves. Okay. Today, look at it from your own consumption habits. How do you kind of go about doing your purchases? I'll talk about mine. I do my daily grocery buying invariably from the neighborhood kirana store or the grocery store. Maybe my large purchases today have gone online, okay, where for multiple reasons, I would be shopping over there. I do not kind of go to the modern trade, and I'm kind of very specific as a consumer. I do not go to modern trade because it entails a lot of other logistical challenges for me to kind of go there, buy over there. So what's going to happen is that you will see all three channels kind of existing, coexisting. You will see general trade continue to be the dominant channel for the foreseeable future. And when I say foreseeable future, I'm talking at least about the next decade or even a couple of decades. Okay. Now, from a perspective of a food brand, for a food brand to grow in the GT channel, it'll depend on what kind of product you're talking about. Okay. So if you're talking about staples, if you're talking about commodity products, I think general trade is the best way to kind of go about it, because general trade typically has this perception of offering better value for such kind of products. in terms of the fact that if it's a premium or let's say an indulgence product, what I see today is two things happening. One is, yes, there is a preference for consumers to buy this. They typically go from a modern trade e-commerce route because that's where brands typically assume that this would find higher traction. But then over a period of time, what I've seen is as that particular brand of product or food product, on the indulgence side, gains acceptance, there is a trickle down effect to the general trade also. Because end of the day, you're wanting this particular category of products or this indulgence product to be available wherever you want it to be. And brands typically are trying to answer to that whole question. So one is general trade is not going to die away. Okay. Modern trade and e-commerce, definitely they're making their efforts to grow in a much larger space. There are a lot of other considerations also, Praveen, with respect to these channels. Okay. A few of them got it right. Let's see how it progresses. Okay. And from a food brand perspective, I think there are multiple ways, but one needs to be certain about what kind of category of products we're talking about. I think over here, Venkat, is someone raising his hand? Sajal, I'm not too sure how we can address that.
One second. So just my 2 cents, Sanjeev, I think you said it right. So India is a market where nothing dies. Everything coexists. So these neighborhood kirana stores or the small stores have been there for time immemorial, and they continue to operate. But the inefficient stores among these stores would die. Obviously, the stores which are relevant, efficient would continue to operate. I think similar. There's one more question, but unfortunately has not given his name. So he is asking: there has been a decline in trend of wholesaler super distributors contribution, decline in terms of contribution to overall sale. But are we expecting it to be reduced to zero in next 5 to 10 years and focus on direct reach only? So here the question is around wholesalers or super distributors. Their contribution coming down, I think primarily because if you have MT and e-com, so typically companies are servicing them directly. So therefore your wholesaler or super distributor contributions coming down. The question is, do you expect them to reach zero in next 5 to 10 years and focus on direct reach only?
So Venkata, I think from a perspective of wholesalers, their dominance has come down, and this primarily because the infrastructure issues have improved over a period of time. That's one thing. Will they become completely zero? No. I still believe that in the rural markets, there is a definite need for such kind of players. Okay. What's definitely happening on this front, and time will say whether it's a successful model, is the fact of tech-enabled, B2B organizations who are wanting to kind of fulfill the role of a wholesaler, but with a lot of technology, a lot of transparency, a lot of visibility. We'll see how that goes up because there are a lot of other economic considerations over there also. But the fact of the matter is that the role of the wholesaler will still be required in certain areas. It will decrease from the previous times. Will super distributors kind of be still required? Again, this is on the, on the size of the organization, if I were to put it simply. If the organization has the capability, they'd want to go direct everywhere because there's a lot of things which kind of come into control. Yeah. But for an organization which would not want to go direct, even into the rural markets, you will have a requirement of super distributors. So I think each of them has a role to play. Their roles will evolve over a period of time, and time will say whether, these people will actually continue to be there or not be there. But from a present perspective, I think both of them have a role to play, Venkata.
Yeah, so there is a question from Riyaz. Sanjeev, you talked about somewhere during the trends about the emergence of D2C brands, and then quick commerce. So he's asking us to elaborate a little bit on how this D2C and quick commerce is going to evolve in future.
So it's a pretty huge topic, and maybe Riaz, you can connect separately also with me. But the fact of the matter is, I do not see, and this is my personal view, D2C becoming a very dominant channel. It's going to be there for brands from a takeoff perspective. Okay, there will be a lot of niche brands, or like we talked about it, the fact that a lot of brands are wanting to personalize their products for consumers. Such kind of brands will definitely thrive on the D2C platforms. But will they go mainstream? Will D2C kind of become so huge that it's the only channel? No, I don't think of it that way. there will be a time, because of the whole ecosystem, they need to kind of adapt and go on to the offline world, which is all the channels which we talked about. From a quick commerce perspective, if there is an answer to the unit economics, which I've been hearing across, when speaking to people within this particular field, if there is an answer to that, then there is a definite reason for this particular channel to thrive. Okay. Right. Today, people have not been able to solve the unit economics, which, as I understand, that's why you see this possibility of delivery charges coming in when you're wanting to order something. The question is that 5 rupee or 10 rupee delivery charge adequate enough? I don't believe so. I think it needs to go up probably to even 30 or 50 rupees for it to become adequate. So till that question is answered, I think it's going to be a stage of cash burn, but it's definitely something which consumers are preferring. Let's see how it progresses.
Yeah. So then there is a question around, I think, type of with respect to RTE, ready to eat products. So he's saying, since we are talking about emerging markets, what are your thoughts on RTE products and their future? The background is most of the population would be working in future. Do you see the people would move to RTE products or maybe order from e-commerce channel more? So what are your so basically he's saying that because the more and more people are coming into working population, so they have less time. So would you see the share of RTE products among food products, and also the share of e-commerce channel going up as a direction? I think that's the direction, but
yeah. So correct, you're right, Venkata. So that's definitely a direction. RTE or anything which kind of helps in the convenience, and that's what's something which I talked about right at the very beginning. That convenience is something, one of the broad changes which are happening as families are becoming more nuclear. We saw it earlier only in urban centers. Now we are seeing it in semi-urban areas also, where families are becoming nuclear. Okay, both the the adults are kind of typically wanting to work, and if this is a situation which kind of sees more women enter the workforce, you're definitely going to see a larger demand for RTE products. Okay. And that kind of feeds into this whole aspect of convenience. If this, what we talked about earlier about e-commerce, quick commerce, if that becomes a viable this thing, then definitely there is this huge sense that it is projected to be bigger than modern trade in the coming decade. Okay, so both of them kind of are on the fact that yes, that they will be progressing, becoming larger, basis the current trends which are there, Venkata.
Again, there are 2-3 technology questions. So let me see. Fayaz is asking, in the context of general trade channel, how do you see the role of artificial intelligence evolving in the coming years to further enhance sales forecasting accuracy and distribution efficiency? I think you touched upon it, and I think I also added saying that technology can greatly enhance both sales forecasting accuracy and distribution efficiency. I think the answer is yes. Then there's one more question from Riyaz saying that I have a big team of approximately 600 team members pan India. One second. Please share the process to get this SFA tool. I think, hi Riyaz, somebody from our team will reach out to you. Then there is required guidance on to enroll hawkers and wholesalers on the SFA DMS system. Hipil Doshi. Hi Hipil. Again, someone from our team would reach out to you, help you on this. There's one more difficult question here. Riyaz Ahmad, any ideal percentage contribution of all channels to see a growth of a brand?
So honestly, Riyaz, it will depend on the kind of product that you have. I will just quote one live example from my previous organization, where we were doing almost about 20 to 22% from e-commerce. Okay, another 20% from modern trade, or 25% if I remember correctly, and the balance was general trade. It depends on the current size of your organization. Number one, where are you in the growth? There is a high and I'm talking more from a perspective of a premium indulgence product. It will typically tend to weigh in favor of modern trade and e-commerce. And as you kind of make it more broad-based, the general trade component will kind of keep coming in. But if you go on the reverse side, if you were to pick up a commodity brand, it will typically find more prevalence, or even a beverage brand, it will find more prevalence across general trade. So maybe general trade could be about 90-95% over there, and modern trade and e-commerce could be about 5 to 8%. So there's no one answer for this. It will have to depend upon the brand, the category of products, and the stage of evolution for that particular organization.
And your positioning of that particular brand, is it a mass brand, or is it a niche brand, or is it targeted at a very specific audience, right? So I think we are 5 minutes over time. I think I'll take the last question. There are a few more questions which we will send them directly the answers. So this question is from Chaitali Chaudhary. So she's asking, today consumer get plethora of product choices online, but they want to metros. So how do product companies manage the challenge of keeping the balance and retain consumer? I think she's saying that a physical channel would give you the benefit of experiencing the product, whereas the online channel gives you the convenience. So how do you balance both?
So Chetali and Venkata, I think it's also a function of what kind of a product you're talking about. Let's say that it's again, wellness product, for example, or a cosmetic, okay, from the beauty care industry. I would say that if it's been there on the online platform, taking it to the offline platforms, particularly in metros, will have to be a judicious decision. You'll have to decide on, because you cannot categorize the offline world with just one brushstroke. Not all stores are together or the same. You'll have to look at the geographies. A lot of things will have to go into it. You'll have to identify which stores would you ideally like to be there in, where your potential customers could come in, given their experience online and want to buy the products offline. This is what you talked about it. So it will require a lot of discussions within the brand itself and with the front end team, and figure out which are these stores where you would like it to be starting off from, and then take it up. It's going to be a journey. It's not going to be, a one-stop solution that you do this and everything's going to be fine. You may realize that after taking it offline, then you need to iterate. So it's going to be a journey, and as you learn, you're going to kind of constantly iterate on that.
Thank you, Sanjeev, for your detailed answer. I think we are out of time. So thank you all for joining us this afternoon, and thank you, Sanjeev, so much for your insights into the current state of the CPG markets. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Venkata, it was a pleasure to be here, and thank you everyone in the panel as well as the audience for having me over here. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.